Well, g'day everyone. It's the Two Ordinary Cops. We are back again, and Damo, mate, how are you?
Good, mate. Good, good, good. I'm in Byron Bay. I'm 20 years too old to be in Byron Bay, mate. There are backpackers everywhere. It's a weird little joint, Byron. It's like a mini Gold Coast. There's sort of like retail outlets, and man, I've never seen so many ice cream shops. And there's just young, very young people everywhere, all hanging out and having a good time. And yeah, no, it's a cool. It's very, I don't know, very corporate, but it is what it is, you know. So yeah, I'm in Byron, mate. Byron Bay.
Yeah. So, mate, it's schoolies at Byron? Any schoolies
I
or not?
think so. Yeah, I think quite a few schoolies come here. I can't keep up, mate. I did schoolies week 25 years ago, so I can't really keep up too much. But
Yeah.
yeah, there's a lot of They look, man, they all look like teenagers to me, but they're probably nearly 30. Who knows? I don't know. I can't keep track. Yeah. No, well, we're down here doing some up here, I should say, from me doing some firefighter training for the Iraqwal Aboriginal group.
Yep.
And yeah, we're putting them through the paces, and it's pretty warm, pretty humid, so it's been good getting out on the tools, and I just keep spraying everybody with water to keep them cool. So it's all good.
Oh, shit, mate, that's all right. Mate,
Yeah.
I'm just going to do a big. We got a contact, or Jack's got in contact with us. He's looking at, he's going to start training in January, I believe, in the police. And, mate, he was just touching on, basically just asked, he just said when we're talking to friends and family about stories about our time in the force and wondering about privacy and does that pose a problem? And also, is there any rules around social media? Which is probably a good one for anybody looking to get into the police.
Oh, and there are massive rules around it. So I think what a lot of people will realise when we tell our stories, we never identify anyone who is not a police officer, and even then we try and keep that a little bit limited because we you can't. We are trusted. We have a duty of care, and that includes confidentiality with what we do. Very
Yep.
similar to the way a doctor has confidentiality with a patient. I will never identify without their explicit consent um, any victim, witness, offender, anything like that. We talk about police officers involved in jobs, and we talk about what's happened, and we never ever identify the people it's happened to. So we can talk about individual members that have been involved in things, and sometimes we haven't necessarily got their consent, but we we then speak to them, and or we've mentioned a story where people have been involved, but they're always police officers who are personal friends. So
Yeah.
we do that. So that sort of covers the confidentiality. Absolutely, there are rules around confidentiality. You are being entrusted. Would it? You look at it this way: would the average person ever have this information or be subjected to this sort of thing? And the answer is absolutely not. So, as a police officer, you're a very trusted person, potentially a very trusted. You should be a trusted member, and you're trusted to do your job. You're not there not representing you. You are there representing the arm of government that is the police. So you don't have the right to identify people involved in these things, and nor should you. And that's the way that works.
Yeah.
And social media, are there are there rules around social media? Oh my God, yes. They're a huge. We're not going to cover it now because you're going to, if you turn up at the police academy or college. I don't know the jurisdiction, so whichever jurisdiction, but they're all going to be the same. Um, there are very strict rules around what you do on social media.
Yep.
And every jurisdiction will have a media policy unit or a media unit that is their caveat between, or the conduit, wrong word, the conduit between the police force and what gets released to the public. And a lot of the time there's public interest in matters that it has to be released. And there is other times where it's a duty of care that the public is informed about certain situations that are occurring. But there is absolutely media policy and social media policies in every police force, and they are very strict. And if you breach them, you can instantly lose your job. So, no, they definitely are, and they're very strict, and so they should be. I mean,
Yeah.
can you imagine every copper on earth putting their public opinion to the masses on what should occur? Like, you don't have the right to do that. You are representing an organisation and carrying out your statutory role as a police officer. you don't own the content that you're delivering, basically. So, I mean,
Yeah.
what we talk about is our personal. Basically, we're two private citizens, not in any police forces anywhere, and even still, I think we actually comply with media policy units. So, we
Yeah.
never identify anybody. And that's out of respect for people. We don't have the right to do that, and we never will.
No, that's exactly right, mate. It's
Mm.
like, and I've said to a number of people in well, in the past, that police are held to a very, very high account, and with that becomes responsibilities. And in fact, that we are also monitored, probably highly or more, like more than anybody, or scrutinised more than anybody, any other government agency, even politicians.
Oh,
So
far higher, yeah.
yeah, the police, you to be a police officer, you have to be extremely diligent about the way you conduct, I suppose, your affairs and all that sort of thing. But also, like, and I did mention, it also goes into police become very good at not disclosing things. I mean, we got a bit of a talk up about the anonymous from last week. She said we did a very good job, but I mean, we've done this for years, and every police officer learns how to keep things quiet, or well, they should, and if they don't, then they get a big smack on the ass, and so they should. Um,
Well, you're being entrusted through your station as a police officer about information that they would never tell you if you were just a stranger.
yeah,
There's no other reason that you were told. I've interviewed people who've told me despicably intimate detail about sexual assaults, about child sexual assault, about all kinds of things. You would never disclose that to someone unless they're in a trusted position. And as a result, there has to be that level of trust that goes back the other way.
yeah,
So yeah, and I I get very angry with people who don't honour that trust, because the trust is given to that, and it's not just the uniform. It might be given to the badge on the hip of the person in business clothes, and that was generally my experience when I'm really delving into some really intimate things with people. Um, they are trusting me because I'm presenting evidence to the court in order to bring them justice for something that's been done to them. So even as a person, it's despicable to breach that trust. So that's why those policies exist, and that's why we will never identify people who we haven't got their explicit consent to identify them in a particular story.
yeah,
And we've even probably flirted with that by mentioning police officers' names, and the police that we have mentioned, we've mentioned them in a positive light because they're good friends of ours and we respect them professionally as well. So that's why
yeah.
they've been mentioned.
Yeah. We're
Yeah,
very careful about who we mention and how we mention it and all that sort of thing,
yeah,
because I mean there's things that happen in the police that nobody will or should know. It's not in the public interest to know, and especially when because you do have sensitive details. I mean, look at some of the stuff we're investigating. Very sensitive details about people of the public, and
yeah.
so we try and keep that a lid on that as much as possible, and that's why there is such strong policy around that in the police force. So, but mate, also I reckon that kind of segues nicely into what you want to talk about today. So,
Well, yeah, a little bit. I mean, what we were talking about, what we were thinking was, I had to think for a second. I'd forgotten. I sort of went down that rabbit hole. But we're talking about the different jurisdictions. So the question we quite often get, and I remember getting this off family members because they'd be like, "Oh, so can you get posted back to Queensland now that you're in the police force?" And it's like, no, no, I
yeah,
can't, because the police in Australia are state organisations. So every state government has their own police force. The exception to that is the Australian Federal Police, which are a federal government or a Commonwealth government organisation, and they have their mandate and the way that they work. But police in Australia are operated by their individual states, and we call those jurisdictions. And those jurisdictions may as well be different countries in some degree, to some degree.
yeah,
Um, so there are this is something I didn't actually realise people were confused about, and a lot wouldn't be. But people just, I've had it a couple of times from quite intelligent family members who've gone, "Oh, so could you get posted back to Toowoomba or something like that?" It's like, well, no, because that's the Queensland Police. I'm in the Northern Territory Police.
yeah,
And, "Oh, but you're a sergeant now." Yeah, that doesn't matter. I'm a sergeant in the Northern Territory Police. So I'm not, I've got nothing to do with Queensland. So I think what we're going to do today is just explain. I mean, a lot of people will find this very obvious, but we'll explain the differences between the fact that there are different jurisdictions.
Yep.
And what comes with that is that they're bureaucratically run completely differently. They have different policies and procedures, and each state government, so move above the police, go back to the government. State governments have different legislation. There are different laws in different states all over the country. We're all
Yep.
very similar, but there are different laws everywhere. So I think we can sort of go on with that a bit. And then we can talk about how we relate to each other as police and enforce laws when people cross borders, because you would all know that you can quite freely drive completely over a state border in Australia and you're just in a different state, no problem. That creates a few headaches if you've just committed a crime in a different state and you've crossed the border. But
Yep.
there's a ways around that, crooks. Don't worry, there are ways around that, and we'll talk about that as well. So I think what we'll talk about today is just how those jurisdictions actually work. I mean, we're not going to go into a lot of detail, but we'll cover off on how those jurisdictions are all different and how
Yep.
different police forces interact with each other in order to still bring justice for interstate crime. So did you want to kick off a little bit, mate? Because I've got plenty of stories, but
Well,
did you want to sort of
mate,
explain how the jurisdictions work?
yeah, well, basically, I mean, you gave it a pretty good rundown there. Yeah, so everybody has their own legislation. They are all fairly similar. I mean, if you look at and correct me if I'm wrong, Damo, but I think you agree with me here that basically Northern Territory copied Queensland a lot to do. And I know they did a lot of updates in relation to legislation, even while we were at the college and all that sort of thing. I think that's correct, isn't it? We basically piggybacked off the back of Queensland.
A little bit.
Originally.
So,
Yeah,
yeah, what happened in the territory is a little, well, it's not a little bit, it's very unique in that the Northern Territory government didn't actually exist until 1978. So they got self government in 1978. And before that, all the other states were very much established. Given that Queensland and the Northern Territory had a very close relationship back in the day, or was and still do. I mean, they're very sort of similar places in a sense, a little bit.
yeah,
Um, what happened was in 1978, the Criminal Code Act, and listen, if anyone knows this better than I do, correct me. In 1978, we basically took the Queensland Criminal Code Act and brought it across and introduced it into Queensland,
yeah,
into the Northern Territory, sorry. What's happened since then is that there's been lots and lots of amendments so that this is only one act of legislation. There are lots and lots of different acts in the NT that are completely unique to the NT. But a lot of the offences that came across in the old-fashioned Criminal Code Act were copied from Queensland. A lot of them still exist, but a lot were also amended through the years to suit the Northern Territory's jurisdiction, to suit what the people of the Northern Territory wanted through their elected officials. So, legislation at that level that really runs your day-to-day life is through the states. So all your traffic offending, I know we've got the Australian road rules, but each individual jurisdiction's got its own traffic act, for want of a better term. They're all called different things,
yeah,
but that's because they're from different parliaments. They're from different state parliaments. So each state will introduce different legislation to their state, and that will also give different powers to the police to enforce that legislation. So I think we could spend, bloody hell, we could spend forever speaking about that. But as a result, what that creates is a situation where all the police forces in Australia, we all wear a uniform that looks similar, not the same, but all similar. We all drive vehicles that have police written on them that's normally the same. And we are all able to help people in the community. And we should be people that we're not cops, but anyway, the police
yeah,
should be people that people go to for assistance in any regard in any jurisdiction. But there
yeah,
are differences. There are legislative differences. If you punch somebody in a pub, outside any pub in any state, there is a law that is against that. The way that law is punished and the way that law is actually termed will be different from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, but
yeah,
you're not allowed to do it, mate. So
yeah,
basically, Australia is very similar in that all our laws are very similar, but there are little idiosyncrasies in every different jurisdiction. And I
yeah,
think that's the difference. So
yeah,
where it becomes a problem, and the other thing is for transferability of skills. Okay, might have been a Northern Territory sergeant, but I can't go and operate the Queensland Police computer system. So we've all got, or the New South Wales police system, or the Victorian, or anything else. I don't know how to operate their computer system. I'm not completely up to scratch with there are slightly different powers all around the place. I'll give it a really simple example. If you get done drink driving, so if we, if you're pulled over for drink driving in the Northern Territory, or you're pulled over for a roadside breath test in the Northern Territory, you are required to blow in that tube. If you don't, you commit an offence and you are arrested on the spot. In Victoria, I don't think that's the case. And Victorian police, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think from a conversation I had with a former Victorian police officer in the Northern Territory, they request you to accompany them to a police station. So you're not actually arrested. But if you refuse to go with them, you commit another offence, which they can't really arrest you for, but you will get smashed in court, basically, and you'll lose your licence for a long time. So, whereas in the Northern Territory, you can be arrested immediately. You'll be pulled out of the car, and if you refuse to go with them, they will use force to arrest you. That's a
Yeah.
little difference in the way that the laws are applied. Are you allowed to drink drive in Victoria or the Northern Territory? No, but the way that the law works it is different. So, and that's one little example. And the thing is, it's different across the board. The way that we talk, the way that we interact with people. I remember I had quite a bit to do with the Western Australian Police in Kununurra when I was over there for a trip from Katherine with the drug squad that we're in. And I remember them saying to people when they gave their caution, which is a fairly standard thing for anyone who watched crime shows, you have the right to remain silent, blah, blah, blah. That is a standard thing across basically the Western world, that you don't have to speak to the police if you don't want to. In WA, they had a bit more of a spiel where you have the right to protection from the media. So when you're in custody, you actually have the right for police to sort of protect your identity from the media, whereas that's not the case anywhere else. No, we don't tell them that. And if the media film us doing that, we can't really stop them. We'll keep them back operationally, but we won't impede what they're doing. So, and I don't know exactly how that works either. So WA police, correct me on that. But I remember that there was just a different spiel. And that's what I mean. We all operate differently. So I think the next part of that is there's a good example in the news just in the last week or so where I think it was maybe a week or two ago where a couple of offenders kidnapped somebody who got shot in New South Wales, and the offenders were arrested in Western Australia. And it was newsworthy, I think, because they arrested them at gunpoint using AR-15 assault rifles. So it was a pretty dramatic arrest. And because it's dramatic and it will get viewership. It was on the news, on the national news. So the answer is the sort of what happens there is if you break the law to a certain degree in a different jurisdiction, you can be arrested in any other jurisdiction, and the term is called extradited back to the jurisdiction that you're sought in. So what happens there is that there's arrest powers, and I'll speak of the Northern Territory because I know about that. So we talk about the old 123 in the Northern Territory was a member of the police force can arrest any person where they believe on reasonable grounds that person has, is, or will, or what is it, is committing, has committed, or is about to commit an offence.
Yep.
So that means that we can arrest anyone for any offence that we believe they have committed, and it means that if they're about to hit somebody on the head with a hammer, we can stop them doing that and arrest them for doing it, basically. So that power of arrest changes from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. There is a second part to that says that you can arrest any person who has committed an offence. I think it's likely to and look, I can't remember the exact, and I'm not reading legislation here. So if there is an offence punishable by imprisonment that has been committed in another jurisdiction in Australia, a Northern Territory police officer can arrest them for that. So that's where the states can work together. Every state has a similar power of arrest, and it will generally be involved with what we call indictable offences, which are your more serious offences. So if you were caught speeding in Queensland, you're not going to get a ticket in the Northern Territory. We're not talking about regulatory offences. We're talking about the higher end indictable offences that you could go to prison for. So the example there was they committed a very serious offence where they kidnapped a person. The person was, I think they arrested them for attempted murder. They shot the person, and for that person's luck, that person didn't die. So that they attempted to kill them and they didn't die. Well, those offenders were then caught in Western Australia, and they were arrested by Western Australian police and brought before the Western Australian justice system in order to be granted custody back to the New South Wales police to escort them back to New South Wales in order for them to face justice in the jurisdiction that they committed the offences.
Yeah.
That's a lot of words, Schultzy.
Well, it is, mate.
Hmm.
Actually, I've just brought it up as you were talking about. It comes under Section 125, I
I
believe.
thought it
A
was
member,
125.
yeah, so a member of the police force may, without warrant, arrest and take into custody a person if the member believes on reasonable grounds the person has, in a state or another territory, committed an offence against the law of that state or territory, and there
If
is
committed
under
in the
that.
Northern Territory, yeah.
Yep, and under the law, and there is under the law of the Northern Territory a similar offence that is punishable by imprisonment for a period of 6 months.
Oh, there you go. So 6 months. So there you go.
Yep,
So,
yep.
I mean,
Exceeding
we
six.
don't want to get bogged in legislation, but the fact of the matter is, if people commit offences in interstate areas, they can be arrested by the police in a different jurisdiction and then returned, and that's called an
Yep,
extradition. The New Zealand coppers used to laugh at us when we used to talk about this because in New Zealand, the police are a federal government organisation. I don't know exactly how New Zealand's broken up as far as states and whatnot goes. I don't understand if they've got different
it's not. I
jurisdictions,
don't
but
think, no.
there is only one police force in New Zealand. It's the New Zealand Police. So they are the federal police, they are the state, county, whatever else. They are everything. They are the police all over the place. They wear the same uniform, they operate under the exact same guidelines.
Yep.
Australia's not the same. Australia they're all statewide organisations. So yeah, that's where it comes in. And I've got a few examples. So because of those differences in jurisdiction, so someone can commit a fairly minor offence in one jurisdiction and just run over the border, and that we won't necessarily have the power in that different jurisdiction to deal with them. But yeah, where is that high level offending? That's where you can bring them back. So I think we can tell. I can certainly tell a few stories where I've been on a couple of extraditions. They weren't very exciting. They were pretty boring. There are really good stories of extraditing really serious offenders from interstate where you've gone down there, presented the case to an interstate court to have the warrant issued by that court for you to have the authority to transport that person out of the state
Yep.
and take them back to our jurisdiction. So the one I first got, I lost it. This is how it gets in CIB offices. We had quite a few who would from Kununurra who would come across to Katherine. It's only about a 4-hour drive, and they would commit offences over here, and we're talking serious offences where they'd then run, or if they were Northern Territory residents who would then run to the WA to hang out with family members over there. We would notify the Western Australian Police in Kununurra, who'd hunt them down and arrest them, and they'd let us know we've got him in custody. Yep, this is what's happening. He's appearing in court tomorrow, so we'd organise an extradition crew to go and get him. And the way that we used to select who would go on those extraditions was rock, paper, scissors. And I never won any. I missed out on 3 that went to Kununurra by air to pick up offenders. I think one actually went to Broome, and I missed out on that too. But when I was in Tennant Creek in 2013, we had an offender who was a prolific child abuse offender. He was a groomer. So I'm not going to go into the details of the offending. He was just a piece of shit. Anyway, we found out he was in Mount Isa. We built a case against him locally in Tennant Creek. We identified him through his mobile phone, found out he was in Mount Isa, and notified the Mount Isa police, so the Queensland police. Within about 3 hours, Queensland police had him in custody. So we knew that he was in the watch house in Mount Isa. So straight away, we're now making application for extradition. And as part of that application, obviously there's the legal side of it that goes, this is what we're going to do. It gets signed off by our bosses because there's obviously a cost involved in transferring prisoners from interstate. And we were approved for the extradition. We put our file across electronically to Queensland, and they took the person before the court. We said, right, we're going to fly over an air wing and pick him up. And then they said, yeah, because you're in Tennant Creek and Mount Isa is only 6 hours away, you're actually going to transport him by car. And because he's not considered to be a violent offender, you're going to take the superintendent's Prado and you're going to have him in the back seat. He's going to be handcuffed in the back seat of the Prado. And we're like, oh, so we got a 6-hour drive with this goose in the back seat of a Prado. So we drove across to Mount Isa, went to court. He was remanded into our custody to be extradited back to Tennant Creek to face court in Tennant Creek or a day or two later. And away we went. And yeah, we turned up in Mount Isa. We stayed the night with them. Extraditions from a police point of view, just from the personal people on the ground doing the job point of view, they're quite good. And we used to always make a point of if we had lots, I received a lot of interstate detectives coming to get offenders from Catherine and Darwin. And it was a big thing to take them out on the town and have dinner with them and get them to know and build a relationship with those interstate police, because you sort of need that reciprocal cooperation in order to make this justice work. So they're quite enjoyable. You get to meet some very similar-minded people in different jurisdictions and talk about the differences between the way you do your job, because policing is policing, but it's not exactly the same in each jurisdiction. So, yeah, we'd go back and we went over to Mount Isa and we had a night out, had a few beers with the locals, and the next day we went to court, picked up our shithead and put him in the back seat. And the worst thing was we're dealing with a pedophile, so there's no respect for him whatsoever. I didn't want to hear a word he had to say, and he did not shut up for 6 hours. All the way back to Tennant Creek, we're just like, mate, I don't care. Can you please be quiet? Just sit there quietly and don't talk to me. I don't want to listen to your shit. And he's trying to justify what he'd done. It was just rubbish. So anyway, we get him back, throw him in the cells, and thank God that's over. But that was my one and only extradition. And lots of other people have far better stories than that.
Well, yeah, mate. I mean, I never had any. Although I look, one of the things I was going to say before is it is so important to build relationships in other jurisdictions, because you can get a lot of work done very, very quickly. I've got one story where I think I was working with George Hillen actually, and we arrested this guy. It was a fairly standard domestic matter. Or no, I think we just dealt with him. And anyway, looked him up on the system, and he was on our police system. So obviously he's fairly transient, but he had a warrant in Queensland. But unfortunately, on our system, you've got to go through Intel to actually get exactly what the warrant's about. We need to do it fairly quickly because we think this guy was pretty high risk of basically taking off. So I contacted my contact in Queensland and said, "Can you look up this guy for me?" And and they did. And then they actually got Queensland Intel to call me and give me the information on the warrant. Unfortunately, it wasn't one that was for extradition, but I think he actually took off anyway. But it worked because he took over to Western Australia. It wasn't our problem anymore. But so, mate, you want to, yeah, you do want to, because it all comes down to the crime that's been committed, whether they will extradite them or not, or whether they'll, spend the money in actually doing that, because I mean every police force unfortunately does have to watch its dollar signs,
its budgets. So yeah, I mean you've got to save your money. You can't just chase every goose who's just committed a minor offence into every jurisdiction. It's just not going to happen. If they're silly enough to come back to the jurisdiction, they've got an outstanding warrant, they'll be arrested and dealt with and whatever else. It's more about that. And when I say higher end, I'm not talking that much higher, though we definitely do chase people. I just want to reassure the public a bit. We don't just pay them off.
No.
And I'll give another example. This was a story where when I was in that drug squad in Catherine, myself and my partner, so there were three of us in that unit, and we used to work pretty closely with the dog unit as well. Me and the other constable in that unit, we were out. We used to drive an unmarked Prado, and we used to wear high vis. And the reason for that is because high vis is what I like to call urban camouflage. So. Yep. When you're in high vis, people look straight through you. They just assume you're a tradie, and there's no suspicion aroused. Even if you've got a gun hanging off your hip, they sort of double look at you. So there was a particular day where there wasn't a hell of a lot going on. We thought we'd go proactive and just see if we could go down to a little local hotspot and see what was going on with anyone committing drug offences. We'd just sit there in an unmarked Prado, which every second car in the Northern Territory is a white Prado. So we're just parked in the Woolworths car park, just watching the crowd. And I'll never forget, a truck pulled up, just a small truck, pulled up, and it had a Victorian registration. We just had a look. And anyway, this fella got out, and he looked a grotty bloke. We didn't think anything of that. But then two female backpackers got out of that truck, and I've never seen two young women more motivated to get away from this person as I did those two. They obviously no offending, but they were very uncomfortable with their situation. So I think what's happened was he's picked up some backpackers who were hitchhiking and driven them into Catherine, parked out the front of Woolworths, and they've jumped out and they've just gone, "Oh my god, get me away from this creep." Anyway, that piqued our interest a little bit. And we had a Victorian registration. I was like, yeah, okay. So we ran that through the system and got back the registered owner's details, and straight away we could see that he had a name and everything else, and his face popped up on his license details, and we got his name, and then we ran that name through our criminal databases that we have. There's police that obviously have computer databases of people with photos in them, mugshots. He came up straight away with red alerts on there's alerts that come up on people like this that grab your attention. He had outstanding arrest warrants in Victoria for child sexual abuse. So anyway, we then went, right, what's the go with this? We got all his information. We sort of, where's he staying? And we realised he had a local Catherine address and had interactions in Catherine with the government being, driver licenses, details and things like that. So we knew where he was staying. And anyway, what we did was we came back and we contacted, the warrants were issued and the dealings, just with delving a bit more into the computer system, we realised the offences had been committed in Geelong. So we then just called the local Geelong police station and asked to speak to somebody in the CIB branch or the criminal investigation branch down there. And we spoke to people down there, and I remember saying to this lady who was a police officer down there, like, what's the go with this fella? We've got him. We don't have him in custody, but he's in Catherine. And she delved into it, and we thought we're going to have an extradition here. Like we've picked up an interstate offender. Anyway, it came back that the offending was historical, and at that stage, that what they'd done is they'd put through a summons file through their local court in Geelong, and he'd failed to show up, and as a result, he had a warrant to appear. So it's historical offending. They had no recent offending. When I say historical, I think it was 15 years old. They had no local immediate offending, and as a result, the local Geelong CIB weren't necessarily seeking extradition. However, they did want to know details about where he was. So what I did locally was I sort of delved into our law a bit and said, well, hang on, what can we do? Because I'm not letting a pedophile walk.
Yeah.
So anyway, we delved into it and realised that we can arrest interstate offenders. Like I said, that 125. We believe they've committed an offence out there. We can put them before our court, and it's going to be likely that we can get bail conditions that will control them in the Northern Territory to return to Victoria to face Victorian courts. So what we did was we arrested him for the interstate offending on the interstate warrant, and just presented that before the court and saying we want him bailed back to Victoria for non-appearance on these warrants, which means his presence in the Northern Territory outside of those bail conditions is an offence.
Yep.
I think the conditions imposed by the magistrate, as it was a local court judge they're called now, was that he had to present evidence in the next 24 hours of either a plane ticket back to Melbourne or back to Victoria, or the fact that he had plans, or he had to contact police along route if he chose to drive back. So he had to drive as far as he could, go to the local police station and present and show that he was leaving the jurisdiction, returning to Victoria. Otherwise, he was in breach of bail in the Northern Territory. So what happened was this particular person failed to turn up the next day with a plane ticket back to Victoria. I think it was a plane ticket.
Yeah.
And as a result, we said, right, we're going to arrest him, get him remanded in custody to present on these charges in Victoria. So what happened was the next day, and look, we don't want to cause the death of anybody, but what happened was very shortly after we'd planned to go and arrest this guy, we get contacted by police in Tennant Creek who said, we've got a person here who's committed suicide, and we realised that we've identified them, and you had dealings with them yesterday in court in Catherine where they were bailed to appear in Victoria. So what has happened is he actually drove south as far as he could, ran out of fuel, and committed suicide on the back of the truck, basically off the back of the truck. So,
Yeah.
I mean, we don't like to cause death. It's not the thing. But the fact of the matter was, There was obviously an element of guilt there in that he's tried to run from justice in Victoria. He's come to the Northern Territory thinking that the Northern Territory is the last frontier and he'll be fine. When he was caught, because interstate jurisdictions communicate and we work together, he realised that he was caught regardless, and he chose to end his own life. So I'm not saying it's an admission of guilt, but
No.
that's what occurred. So I think the point of the story is that, especially with technology, there's nowhere in Australia to hide from serious offending. You will be found out. A lot of police vehicles now have automated number plate recognition. I mean, if you don't have a number plate, you're going to get pulled over. If you do have a number plate, it's going to get recognised by mostly highway patrol, which are an excellent source of intelligence, especially for criminal investigation. And the states definitely do work together. So I think the point of our whole podcast this week is that in Australia we have very separate. We have 8 police forces in Australia. They're all completely separate, but they do work together, especially when it comes to serious offending. So I think that it will be that just because someone's crossed the border doesn't mean they don't get arrested. But I think the first part of it was that the police forces are not the same all over the place. However, you don't just get to commit an offence in one state, cross the border, and you're free. You're not. You've committed that offence. The interstate jurisdiction can still arrest you. So, yeah, I mean, I know that's only 35 minutes of description of how it works, but it's more complicated than it probably needs to be. But we are completely different states, and that's just how we work. What are your
Yeah.
thoughts, mate?
Mate, I was just going to throw in there, like, for anybody that thinks that running to the Northern Territory is a good idea to escape, it is actually probably the worst place
It
to try
is.
and get away, because everybody knows everybody, and you will stick out like a sore thumb, and you will come to police attention very, very quickly.
Absolutely.
It's
I've got
so
another
many people
story
like that.
exactly related to that, and it's very much pre-technology. So I've spoken about my uncle before. He was a Queensland police officer from 1984 to 1993, and as a young fella, we lived out in when I was a child. My father was the mechanic in charge on the Barcoo Shire, based out in Junda, which is southwest of Longreach in Queensland. For those playing along, and anyway, so what happened was my uncle realised that Junda came up as a posting, and he thought, "Well, we'll go and be with family in a remote posting." So he came out as the constable, the senior constable underneath the sergeant. It was a two police officer town, and from about 1988 to about 1990, he was the senior constable in Junda, and he's told the story where he got a phone call one day from the manager, or the owner and manager of a station, a cattle station, about sort of 100 k's away, and he said, "Oh, Pete, I've just had a bloke. I've put him on. So obviously this is pre-internet, pre-social media. This fella's turned up looking for work. He looked like a fairly strapping lad. I've put him on, but the boys had a few beers with him the other night, and he's starting to tell some weird stories about committing crime in the Gold Coast and how talking about the cops, and I just don't like him. He's not a bad worker, but I just don't like the way he communicates." So anyway, back then there were no immediate look up who this person is on the computer. So it might have been fax. There were faxes back then. So I think they sent a fax through to the computer system in Brisbane, where you'd fax something off, and within business hours they'd fax back the information you were looking for. And this fella who was actually wanted down in either Brisbane or the Gold Coast or somewhere in the southeast corner of Queensland. And I think from memory, I think it was for an armed robbery. I don't know exactly what it was, but I think that's what he was talking about. So the reason I say armed robbery is because they were worried about the fact that he was actually armed. So here's this fella who's come out from the southeast Queensland, Sunshine Coast, Brisbane, Gold Coast, Ipswich area of Queensland, gone to a remote area I'm not talking about the Northern Territory. I'm talking about still in Queensland, but way out in the bush. And he's thought he's gotten out of there and he's hiding from the police. Well, the fact of the matter is, like you said, everyone knows everybody, and the local manager knows the police in Junda well, and he's just rung the local police, and as a result, they've gone, yeah, he's got warrants to appear back in Brisbane. So they went out there, but there was alerts on there saying he potentially armed, all this sort of thing back. And this is very, very old school back in the day. Anyway, he said what they did was they took the sergeant's Toyota out there um, as the lead vehicle, and they had the police car standing off. And what they've done is they've gone in plain clothes but armed to the teeth in that Land Cruiser and driven forward and turned up just as ringers. And anyway, where is he? Well, he's in that room over there. He's with his bit crook or whatever it was. And they've arrested him at gunpoint. And lucky they did, because he had from memory, from what he told me, he had a revolver with him all the time. And anyway, he was taken into custody, and then they drove him back to the police car, put him in the police cage, and they've taken him back to Junda and Longreach, and out he went. So that's even quite a long time ago. And that's somebody trying to hide from the police by going to a remote area. And look, sure, back in the day, that would have been fine. Back before the communication system being as good as it is now, a lot of bad people hid in a lot of little places and turned up there and weren't necessarily bad people in the place they'd gone to hide, but they had a history. Well, those days are well and truly gone, Chelsea, because everyone's got social media. The police, at the touch of a button, can do a search on anyone, anywhere. And, there's no hiding anymore. There's certainly not in Australia anyway.
No, that's right, mate. I've got a quick one. You just reminded me. When I was working out in Arnhem Land, we had this guy that was actually he'd moved from interstate and come to work on this location out in Arnhem Land. I won't name the location, but he was working out there, and obviously he had a history across border. And anyway, we knew the guy, and anyway, we're sitting there at the in Jabiru, actually. No, not Jabiru, no, Nullarbor, just having a drink. And anyway, he's telling a few things, and I was with Ray Musgrave.
Oh,
And
God bless him.
yeah, so shout out to Ray. Ray tweaked pretty. I wasn't overly in the conversation, but Ray was, and Ray came up to me and goes, "There's something funny about this bloke." He goes, "I'm going to go and just have a check," because later on we moved back to the police station, to the police club there. So he just went in and just had a chat to the guys there and said, just look this guy up, and yep, fair enough. He had interstate warrants. Anyway, with nothing that we'd left him by then. Anyway, he'd actually headed back out, so we tried to follow it up, but he got cotton onto that we knew, and he took off then interstate. But yeah, so it, like, the police, yeah. If you're talking to somebody and you don't know they're a police officer, which is going to, like, this is for any criminals that think they're not, that too many of them probably listening to this podcast, it's amazing how just having a chat at the pub, you pick up some information, and then you'll just do some searches, and you'll track criminals down. So
Oh, yeah.
yeah,
The
but
best place for a criminal to hide is probably in the most populated
yep,
centre you can possibly go to,
exactly.
because
Which is
in
probably
those
Sydney.
remote areas, you're going to get caught, my boy. Yeah,
Yeah,
and the police out there are no different to anyone else. They've been trained the same way. They will take you to the ground. Just, you don't think they're little bumpkins. They know how to do their job.
that's right, exactly
So,
right.
and seriously, nowadays with technology and aircraft and everything else, even if you are a
Oh,
really serious offender, we can have tactical operators on you within a matter of hours. So
yeah,
it's but that's a good thing. I don't want, this is not a threat to the society. This should be reassuring to law-abiding people. The police aren't out you hunting you down interstate for speeding, but they
yeah,
are certainly going to hunt you down interstate if you've committed murder or rape or fraud or
yep,
armed robberies or anything, especially anything that's going to harm people. If you're considered dangerous, you're going to be hunted down as a matter of priority.
yep,
But even if you've committed high-level theft, anything like that, you will be found and you will be hunted.
yep. Yep, that's exactly right. Now, mate, I think it's we're coming to that time. But do you
There
want to
we are.
mention? Mind you, you've seemed to enjoy the talking tonight, mate.
Yes, sorry, mate.
But mate, this one was your, I suppose your you started this off. So do you want to tell everybody what we're going to be doing next week?
Yeah, so we've sort of been talking about it a little bit, but look, next week is really exciting for me and Schulte. We are heading to Darwin.
Yep,
We're staying up there with my good mate Swifty. Swifty's a sergeant instructor at the police college up there. We've got a few plans. I spoke to Deputy Commissioner Martin Dole, APM. He's a person who I did a course with actually when he was a senior constable first class in about 2010. So he was on promotion to sergeant not long after that, and he's now the deputy commissioner. So I spoke to him, and we're cleared. We're going to have a chat to a few people. We're going to comply with the media and policy unit, sir, just so you're aware. So we're going to head up there, and look, it's going to be an exciting week. I'm really looking forward to it. I'm going to sweat a lot. I'm not acclimatized to the top end anymore, and it's going to hurt, but that's going to be really good. I'm really excited about the fact that we're going back to the territory as podcasters, civilians, and we're going to have a chat to a few different people who are current serving police and just get the current version of what's going on. So, stay tuned next week. Obviously, we'll have a few episodes come out of next week, but I'm really excited. So that's the plan. So next week, we're going to be talking to somebody from the Northern Territory Police. I'm not sure who yet. I'm not sure exactly who. We've got a few pretty good plans about what we want to do, but as of next week, we're in the Territory.
Yep. Yep. So stay tuned, mate. It's pretty exciting. I'm definitely looking forward to it. And I think there's quite a few of our. I mean, there's still a lot of friends we have in the police force.
Oh, definitely.
And so there might be quite a few ales consumed as well. I imagine at night time, but
I'd be bloody disappointed if there weren't.
no, really looking forward to it, and it's great to go out there and just I suppose just mix with them, and get some of the stories and see what's current as well. Especially for me, mate. I've been a bit longer out of the force than you have, so
Yeah.
it's so it's always really good, and it's always you meet up, and this is like for anybody going through the college too. Like we'll catch up with some of our squad mates. I imagine there's quite a few up there still, as we did when you left AMO, and the friendship never dies.
No, it
So
never does.
no, so
I
when
can
you
guarantee you that I'm going to catch up with people I haven't spoken to in years, and it's going to be like I spoke to them yesterday. So I'm really, really looking forward to next week.
Yeah, exactly, mate. Yeah, you hit the nail on the head there. Anyway, mate, I think that might do us for this week.
Absolutely.
So, mate, we'll see you next week, and we'll speak to you from Darwin.
Absolutely. All the best.